There is a multi-billion-dollar industry built on the idea that optimal human nutrition is a recent discovery. Powders and protocols, subscription boxes and patented blends, lab-engineered superfoods in sleek packaging that promise what ancient people somehow managed to achieve without any of it. Here is what that industry doesn't want you to dwell on too long. The most rigorously designed nutritional systems in human history weren't invented in the last decade. They were written down thousands of years ago. And for much of that time, the people eating those foods were stronger, more resilient, and metabolically healthier than the average person sitting in a cardiologist's waiting room right now. The Bible doesn't just tell you how to live. It tells you specifically, precisely what to eat. Named foods, named combinations, named preparations. And modern nutritional science keeps arriving at the same coordinates, generation after generation, as if the destination was always already marked. Today we are walking through 13 of those meals. Ancient, specific, forgotten by most, but not. It turns out, by the science. Pay close attention to number 1. It is not one food. It is 7 foods listed by name in Deuteronomy that researchers analyzing them as a combined system have described as one of the most complete nutritional architectures ever assembled in a single meal. The convergence is difficult to explain as coincidence. And stay with us for number 7. It centers on a single verse buried in 2 Kings, a prophet, a dying king, a paste pressed onto a wound, and what happened next that took modern biochemistry 4,000 years to confirm. 13 meals. Thousands of years of accumulated wisdom. Number 13. Cucumber, mint, and fermented goat's milk bowl. In Numbers 11, the Israelites wandering the wilderness enumerate the foods they are grieving from Egypt. Among them, cucumbers. The Hebrew word used, kishu-I-am, refers specifically to the long, pale cucumbers cultivated in the Nile Delta, not the fat commercial cucumbers most of us buy today. These were thin-skinned, high water content vegetables eaten daily by laborers working in one of the hottest agricultural environments on Earth. Their absence in the desert was felt as a genuine loss. That tells you something about how central they were. Egyptian workers building the pyramids received daily rations that included cucumbers, cuneiform tablets from Mesopotamia record cucumber cultivation as early as 2500 BCE. Sanskrit medical texts from India's Charaka Samhita list cucumbers among foods prescribed for fever reduction and urinary tract health. 3 civilizations, 3 separate traditions. The same vegetable. Modern analysis confirms what those civilizations were observing. Cucumbers are over 96% water and contain silica, a trace mineral that supports connective tissue integrity, joint cushioning, and skin elasticity. They also deliver vitamin K for bone mineral density, cucurbitacins that researchers are currently studying for anti-inflammatory activity, and physidin, a flavonoid that has shown neuroprotective effects in laboratory studies. Crucially, cucumbers have a glycemic index of approximately 15, meaning they contribute almost nothing to blood sugar load while delivering sustained hydration. Here is the preparation detail that changes everything. Combine thinly sliced cucumbers with fermented goat's milk yogurt, not commercial cow's milk yogurt, which is a different product entirely. Goat's milk contains a casein protein called alpha, S2, that forms a softer curd in the stomach and produces a measurably smaller inflammatory response in the gut lining than the dominant casein found in commercial cow's milk. Fermented. That milk becomes a living culture dense with lactobacillus, acidophilus, and bifidobacterium species that colonize the digestive tract, train immune cell response, and produce short-chain fatty acids, particularly butyrate, that reduce intestinal inflammation at the cellular level. Add a full tablespoon of fresh torn mint, not dried, fresh. Mint contains an organic compound called rosmarinic acid, alongside the menthol most people associate with toothpaste. And together, These activate TRPM8 receptors, cold-sensing receptors in the mouth and esophagus that trigger a genuine parasympathetic relaxation response in the digestive tract. It reduces smooth muscle spasms, eases bloating, and physically calms gut motility in ways that double-blind trials have since documented. A 2014 review in the Journal of Clinical Gastroenterology found that enteric-coated peppermint preparations outperform placebo for reducing irritable bowel symptoms. Eat this bowl cold, in the morning, before anything heated. The Israelites weren't eating it for its sophistication. They were eating it because their bodies told them, generation after generation, that they felt better when they did. They didn't have the vocabulary for butyrate or TRPM8 activation. They just knew what worked. And 4,000 years later, the science is now beginning to explain why. Number 12. Garlic and herb lentil soup. If you were tasked with designing the single most immune-supportive meal using only ingredients available to an ancient household in the Near East, you would likely build something very close to this. Lentils are referenced throughout the Hebrew Bible as a staple of ordinary life. Esau famously sells his birthright for a bowl of red lentil stew in Genesis 25. David receives lentils as provisions in 2 Samuel 17. These were not incidental mentions. Lentils were daily bread for much of the ancient world, cheap, storable, filling, and more complete than most single plant foods. What makes lentils exceptional is their fiber architecture. They contain both soluble and insoluble fiber, plus resistant starch that bypasses digestion in the small intestine and arrives intact in the colon, where it feeds Bifidobacterium and Akkermansia mucinifila, two bacterial species specifically associated with reduced systemic inflammation and improved metabolic function. Lentils also deliver folate in concentrations that rival any supplement, along with iron, zinc, and the full suite of B vitamins. Their protein, approximately 18 grams per cooked cup, contains all essential amino acids except methionine, which is easily supplied by any grain eaten the same day. Ancient cooks pairing lentils with barley or wheat bread were running a protein complementation strategy they never had words for. Then add garlic. Generously, the way the ancient world actually used it, not 1 clove, but 6 to 10. Crushed and allowed to rest for 10 full minutes before any heat touches them. That rest period is the critical detail most modern cooks miss entirely. Crushing garlic triggers an enzyme called a lionase that converts alliin into allicin, the primary sulfur compound responsible for garlic's documented biological activity. Heat destroys alliinase almost instantly, but if you crush first and wait 10 minutes, the allicin conversion completes before the enzyme is denatured by heat, meaning you retain measurable antimicrobial and cardiovascular benefit even in cooked preparations. A 2001 study published in the Journal of Nutrition confirmed this 10-minute resting window specifically. Egyptian medical papyri, including the Ebers Papyrus, dated to approximately 1,550 BCE, list garlic in over 20 separate medicinal preparations. Roman legions carried garlic rations on campaigns. Hippocrates recommended it for pulmonary complaints and abdominal disorders. 3 unconnected medical traditions arriving independently at the same conclusion across 1,000 years. Add cumin, which reduces post-meal blood sugar response by slowing gastric emptying, and coriander, which has documented calming effects on the gut lining. Finish with a generous pour of cold-pressed olive oil added off the heat. Not during cooking. Fat-soluble nutrients in the garlic and herbs, particularly fat-soluble sulfur compounds, become dramatically more bioavailable in the presence of monounsaturated fat. The oil isn't finishing. It's delivery mechanism. This soup existed in recognizable form 5,000 years ago. It doesn't need rebranding. It needs a pot on your stove every week. Number 11. Pomegranate and barley grain bowl. King Solomon's temple in Jerusalem was decorated with 200 carved pomegranates on the tops of its pillars, described in 1 Kings 7. The high priest's ceremonial robe was bordered with pomegranates woven in blue, purple, and scarlet. This fruit was built into the most sacred architecture in the biblical world, and no civilization in the ancient Near East did that arbitrarily. Persian texts from 800 BCE describe pomegranate juice as a treatment for intestinal parasites. Ayurvedic medicine classified the pomegranate as one of the 3 fruits of the tridoshic category, meaning it was considered balancing for all 3 fundamental body constitutions simultaneously. Chinese pharmacopoeia recorded pomegranate rind as an antidiarrheal as early as 659 CE. Same fruit, same applications. Separated by thousands of miles and centuries of time, pomegranates contain a class of polyphenols called punicle agens that are found almost nowhere else in the plant kingdom at meaningful concentrations. In the gut, punicle agens are metabolized into urolithins, particularly urolithin A, that have shown in recent research the capacity to stimulate mitophagy, the cellular process by which dysfunctional mitochondria are cleared and replaced. A 2016 clinical study published in Nature Medicine found that oral urolithin A supplementation improved mitochondrial function in elderly adults. The pomegranate was delivering the precursor compound long before anyone isolated it. Add to that anthocyanins concentrated in the areoles, which have shown dose-dependent reductions in arterial stiffness in clinical trials. Ellagic acid, which may inhibit certain inflammatory pathways, and punicic acid in the seed oil, a conjugated linolenic acid with anti-inflammatory properties distinct from any omega-3 you'd get from fish or flax. Build a grain bowl with whole barley as the base dense. Chevy. Stone ground, if you can find it. The beta-glucan fiber in barley is so consistently documented for LDL cholesterol reduction that the FDA has permitted a qualified health claim on barley products since 2006. Scatter pomegranate areoles throughout. Finish with cold-pressed olive oil and a handful of walnuts. The polyphenols in the pomegranate appear to act synergistically with the oleocanthal in the olive oil, both compounds influencing the same COX inflammatory pathway from different angles. The people who carved pomegranates into sacred stone didn't know about urolithins or COX pathways. They knew generation after generation that the people who ate pomegranates regularly seemed to live and function differently from those who didn't. Sometimes, the oldest observations turn out to be the most reliable ones. Number 10. Dates stuffed with pistachios and walnuts. The date palm is referenced more than any other fruit-bearing tree in the Hebrew Bible. Jericho was called the City of Palms. Deborah, one of Israel's judges, held court under a date palm in Judges 4. The Book of Psalms compares the righteous to the flourishing date palm. This was not metaphorical vegetation. It was the tree that kept people alive in some of the harshest landscape on earth. Desert traders and soldiers crossing the Judean wilderness carried dates because dates performed in conditions where almost nothing else could. Date flesh contains a near-perfect ratio of glucose and fructose, roughly 1:1, packaged alongside fiber, magnesium, potassium, copper, manganese, and a full complement of B vitamins. The natural sugars provide rapid, usable energy. The minerals prevent the cramping and fatigue that follow sustained physical exertion in heat. Multiple clinical trials, including a 2011 study in the Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology, have found that women who consume dates in the final weeks of pregnancy experience significantly shorter first-stage labor. The mechanism appears to involve oxytocin receptor sensitivity and natural prostaglandin-like compounds in date flesh. What most people don't know is that dates also contain tannins, specifically condensed tannins, called proanthocyanidins, with documented antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory activity. The same compounds appear in cranberries, which have a century of research behind their urinary tract benefits. Dates contain them in different proportions, but the biological activity is comparable. Now stuff them with a mixture of pistachios and walnuts. Pistachios are uniquely high in prebiotic fiber, outperforming almost every other nut in their capacity to feed lactobacillus and bifidobacterium species in the colon. A 2014 study in the British Journal of Nutrition found that daily pistachio consumption measurably shifted gut microbiome composition toward beneficial species within 3 weeks. They also deliver lutein and zeaxanthin, two carotenoids that protect macular tissue in the eye in concentrations that rival leafy greens. Walnuts contribute alpha-linolenic acid, a plant-based omega-3 that the body converts to EPA and DHA, along with juglone and L-glutathione with anti-inflammatory properties. Together, the fats and protein from the nuts slow the absorption of the date's natural sugars, converting rapid energy into sustained fuel without the blood sugar spike that dates alone would create. Ramadan fasting has been broken with dates for over 1,000 years. The choice was not arbitrary. The body, after a day of fasting, needs rapid glucose delivery without overwhelming the pancreas, and dates accomplish that with a precision that processed sugar never could. Carry 3 of these in your pocket. Eat them mid-morning. What looks like a snack is a portable nutritional system that the ancient world understood long before any laboratory confirmed it. Number 9. Fresh grape and herb plate with aged goat, cheese, and olives. The vine is one of the most spiritually weighted images in all of Scripture. Noah plants a vineyard as his first act after the flood in Genesis 9. Grapes appear at the Passover table, throughout the Song of Solomon, and in moments of both celebration and lamentation across the entire biblical corpus. Jesus describes himself as the true vine in John 15. This wasn't incidental. Something about the grapevine kept demanding the attention of the ancient world. Grapes were central to Greek and Roman nutrition as well, not just as wine, but as fresh fruit and raisins carried by soldiers. Egyptian tomb paintings from 2500 BCE depict grape cultivation and pressing in detail. Ayurvedic texts classified grapes as one of the fruits most beneficial to ojas, the Sanskrit concept, roughly equivalent to vital immunity or foundational health. Fresh grapes, eaten whole skin, and seeds intact, deliver resveratrol, quercetin, and a class of proanthocyanidins called oligomeric proanthocyanidins, or OPCs, that have shown in research the capacity to cross the blood-brain barrier and reduce neuroinflammation. The resveratrol in grape skin activates a gene expression pathway called SIRT1, a sirtuin associated with metabolic regulation and longevity that has become one of the more intensively studied areas in aging biology. Eat the seeds when you can tolerate them. That is where the OPC concentration is highest. Pair fresh grapes with aged goat cheese, real aged cheese, not fresh chev, which has a different probiotic profile. Aged goat cheese contains specific strains of Lactobacillus rhamnosus that have been studied in clinical trials for their capacity to reduce systemic inflammatory markers. The aged fermentation process also converts some lactose into lactic acid, making it tolerable for most people who react to cow dairy. Here is what current research is beginning to examine: the combination of polyphenols from grape skin with viable probiotic cultures from aged cheese appears to produce a synergistic effect on gut barrier integrity that neither food achieves independently. The polyphenols act as prebiotics, feeding and protecting the probiotic organisms, while the organisms in turn metabolize the polyphenols into more bioavailable forms. This is called the phytobiome-microbiome interaction. Researchers first described it formally in 2017. But people in the ancient Mediterranean were experiencing it at every meal without needing a name for it. Add a handful of whole olives, a sprig of hyssop or fresh thyme, and eat this in the afternoon. What looks like a casual mesoplate is a precisely layered immune support system that took science 25 centuries to catch up to. Number 8. Slow roasted lamb with dates. Lamb is the most ceremonially significant animal in all of Scripture. The Passover lamb, the ram provided for Abraham at the last moment in Genesis 22. The lamb imagery woven through prophecy and its fulfillment in the New Testament. Its presence at ancient tables was not incidental to its symbolism. The symbolism grew from the reality lamb was the most nutritionally complete animal food available in the biblical world. And its presence at a table meant something serious was happening. Slow-roasted lamb is dense with B12, which maintains myelin sheath integrity in the nervous system, critical for everyone over 50, because B12 absorption decreases measurably with age. It contains B6 for protein metabolism and immune function, riboflavin for cellular energy production, and zinc in its heme form, the most bioavailable form in nature, absorbed at roughly 3 times the rate of zinc from plant sources. Heme iron in lamb is similarly absorbed at 2 to 3 times the rate of non-heme iron, making it irreplaceable for anyone recovering from illness. Blood loss, or prolonged physical depletion. The dates roasted alongside the lamb contribute something that clinical nutrition has since formalized. Fruit acids, particularly malic acid in dates, reduce the pH of the stomach environment during digestion, which measurably improves iron solubility and absorption. The combination of heme iron from the lamb and the acidic environment from the fruit produces a synergy that ancient cooks discovered by watching outcomes over generations. Rosemary and hyssop, used liberally on the surface of the meat, do more than flavor. Rosemary contains carnosic acid and carnosol diterpene phenols, with documented antimicrobial properties that reduce bacterial load on the surface of raw meat. They also contain ursolic acid, which has shown in laboratory studies the capacity to inhibit atrophy-related muscle loss pathways, a finding currently being explored in aging research. Hyssop, specifically mentioned in multiple Levitical purity rituals, contains pinocamphone and isopenocamphone monoterpenoids, with confirmed antifungal and antibacterial activity that also appear to improve fat digestion by stimulating bile production. The ancient world didn't call this a recovery meal. They called it a feast. But for the exhausted laborer, the woman who had just given birth, the soldier returned from the field, this was medicine, wearing the clothes of celebration, and every culture that encountered it understood what it was doing to the body, even without the vocabulary to say how. Number 7. Fig and almond paste. This is the one that stops people. 2 Kings 20. King Hezekiah is dying. The text describes a severe infection, a shekin, most likely a deep abscess or necrotizing ulcer. The prognosis, delivered by the prophet Isaiah, is death. Hezekiah prays. Isaiah returns with a new word and an instruction that most readers skip past in their relief at the reversal. Take a lump of figs and lay it upon the boil, and he shall recover. Not pray harder. Not wait for divine healing to manifest spontaneously. Press a poultice of figs directly onto the infected wound. The king did. The king recovered. Stand in that scene for a moment. Jerusalem, in the 8th century BCE. Summer heat pressing through stone walls. A man who has led a nation, defended a city against the Assyrian siege, now reduced to this lying in a palace chamber. Feverish. A wound that has not responded to anything his physicians know. 3 days. The text says, 3 days he had been given, and what was placed on that wound was not gold, not incense, not ceremony. It was the cheapest, most common fruit in the market. Modern biochemistry eventually looked at what happened. Figs contain phycin, a proteolytic enzyme that breaks down dead and damaged tissue, facilitating wound debridement through the same mechanism as modern enzymatic debridement preparations used in wound care centers today. Fresh fig latex contains compounds identified in laboratory studies as inhibitory to Staphylococcus aureus and several gram-negative bacterial strains. Benzaldehyde, isolated from figs, has shown documented antimicrobial activity against multiple bacterial species in peer-reviewed research. The research is still developing, but the biochemistry is not poetry. It is plausible mechanism, eaten as food. Figs are among the most mineral-dense fruits in the biblical world. They deliver calcium in concentrations comparable to dairy, plus magnesium, potassium, and B vitamins that function together as what one nutritionist described as a naturally packaged multivitamin. Their pectin fiber is particularly effective at feeding lactobacillus and bifidobacterium species in the gut. And their natural phenolic compounds, including chlorogenic acid and rutin, have shown anti-inflammatory activity in multiple cell-based studies. Pair figs with freshly ground almonds. Not almond flour from a bag, almonds ground fresh within 24 hours of use. Because almond fat begins oxidizing rapidly once the nut is broken. Ground fresh. Almonds deliver vitamin E in its alpha-tocopherol form, the most bioavailable natural form of a fat-soluble antioxidant that protects cell membranes from oxidative damage. They also provide magnesium, which participates in over 300 enzymatic reactions, including DNA repair and protein synthesis. Studies show that regular almond consumption reduces LDL oxidation, the specific form of LDL modification most associated with arterial plaque formation, more effectively than simply reducing dietary fat. Here is the detail most people don't know. The almond blossom was carved into the menorah. Aaron's rod, the symbol of divine authority and priestly legitimacy, was an almond branch that produced blossoms and fruit overnight as a sign. The ancient world did not build sacred objects around foods arbitrarily. They built them around foods they watched. Generation after generation. Do things they couldn't fully explain. Isaiah didn't have a pharmacopoeia. He had accumulated cultural knowledge about what this specific fruit did to infected tissue. The science is now beginning to examine why he was right. If this kind of ancient knowledge resonates with you, hit like and subscribe, because what's coming next goes even deeper. Number 6. Chickpea and hyssop salad with cold-pressed olive oil. There is no dramatic scripture moment for chickpeas. No miracle. No vision. No prophet calling them out by name. They were simply always there, ground into flour, boiled into stews, eaten whole throughout the ancient Near East for at least 10,000 years. Archaeologists have found carbonized chickpea remains at Neolithic sites in present-day Turkey, dated to 7,500 BCE. That is the story. Foods do not persist across 100 centuries unless something about them genuinely works. Chickpeas garbanzo, in Spanish. Cicer arietinum, in botanical Latin, have a glycemic index of approximately 28. For context, white bread sits around 75. That low score reflects chickpeas' unique starch architecture. Their resistant starch arrives in the colon largely intact, where it feeds Akkermansia mucinifila, a bacterial species that reinforces the gut mucosal lining and has been specifically associated with metabolic health, healthy body weight, and reduced risk of type 2 diabetes. The protein and fiber together produce a sustained satiety signal that can last 4 to 6 hours. The Egyptians grew chickpeas extensively. Roman soldiers were issued chickpea rations on campaign. They were lightweight, storable, calorie-dense, and required no refrigeration. The Talmud records specific blessings to be recited before eating legumes, indicating they were significant enough in daily life to warrant liturgical attention. Ayurvedic medicine classified chickpeas as cooling and de-inflammatory. Every major ancient civilization in the Mediterranean and Near East was eating them continuously for reasons their bodies made clear. Dress the chickpeas generously with real cold-pressed extra virgin olive oil, not a cooking oil, labeled light olive oil, which has been refined to the point where most of its polyphenol content has been stripped away. Real extra virgin oil contains oleuropein, hydroxytyrosol, and oleocanthal. Oleocanthal is the compound that deserves specific mention. It shares a biological mechanism with ibuprofen, inhibiting COX-1 and COX-2 inflammatory enzymes. A 2005 paper in Nature estimated that consuming 50 grams of high-quality extra virgin olive oil daily delivers anti-inflammatory activity roughly equivalent to 10% of the adult ibuprofen dose, without gastrointestinal irritation, and taken every single day for a lifetime. Add fresh hyssop, the herb mentioned in Psalm 51, used in Levitical purification rituals, and given to Jesus at the crucifixion. Hyssops officinalis, contient rosmarinic acid, pinocamphone, and flavonoids that modern phytochemistry has characterized as expectorant antispasmodic, and antimicrobial. It also contains hesperidin, a flavonoid that has shown in clinical trials the capacity to improve venous tone and reduce fluid retention, which may explain why it appeared in ancient contexts related to purification and cleansing. Eat this salad cold, at room temperature, not warmed. Heating chickpeas that have already been cooked reduces their resistant starch content. The recooled, then room temperature chickpea delivers the highest prebiotic payload. Ancient people who preserved leftovers and ate them the following day were, unknowingly, maximizing exactly this effect. The research shows that eating legumes regularly is the single dietary habit most consistently associated with healthy aging across all cultures studied worldwide. Not a supplement, not a protocol, just beans, eaten faithfully, day after day, for decades. That is what 10,000 years of results looks like. Number 5. Lentil and barley bread porridge with bitter herbs. The Passover meal, as described in Exodus 12, specifies 3 elements consumed together: the lamb, unleavened bread, and maror bitter herbs. Most commentary focuses on the symbolism, the bitterness of slavery, the haste of departure, the absence of leaven as purification. The symbolism is real, but the nutritional architecture of what they were eating that night also deserves careful examination. Bitter herbs in the biblical context included endive, chicory, horehound, and wild lettuce plants abundant in the Sinai region. Every one of these contains inulin-type fructans, prebiotic fibers that feed bifidobacterium preferentially and increase short-chain fatty acid production. They also contain sesquiterpene lactones, the compounds responsible for their bitterness that stimulate bile production and liver enzyme activity. The liver, operating under stress and depleted from months of labor under harsh conditions, would have benefited specifically from these compounds. Chicory root, now studied intensively as a prebiotic supplement, was being eaten by people leaving Egypt as a bitter herb component. The ancient world was using concentrated inulin as a medicinal food long before the supplement industry gave it a product name and a price tag. Combine this with a dense barley and lentil porridge barley, providing its beta-glucan fiber, lentils contributing resistant starch and folate, and you have a meal that simultaneously supports gut microbiome diversity, manages blood sugar, reduces LDL cholesterol, and delivers a mineral profile capable of replenishing an exhausted body. Ezekiel 4:9 describes a bread made from wheat, barley, beans, lentils, millet, and spelt a combination that modern analysis reveals to be a near-complete protein source alongside a complex fiber matrix that no single grain could provide. This bread is now commercially available and studied for its superior amino acid profile compared to modern wheat bread. Prepare this as a thick porridge rather than a thin soup. Soak the lentils and barley together for 8 hours before cooking. Soaking reduces phytic acid content by up to 50%, which is the compound in grains and legumes that binds minerals like zinc and iron and reduces their absorption. Every minute of that soak time improves the bioavailability of everything in the bowl. Serve with bitter herbs dressed in olive oil. The bitter compounds stimulate digestive secretions that further improve nutrient extraction from everything that follows. This wasn't a ceremonial meal designed to be eaten once a year and then forgotten. It was documentation of how people ate before the wilderness. And the research is now confirming what they knew from daily experience. Number 4. Goat's milk curd with wild honey and herbs. Isaiah 7:15 contains one of the more mysterious nutritional references in all of prophetic literature, describing the child who would be assigned to the house of David. Isaiah writes, "Butter and honey shall he eat, that he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good." The Hebrew word translated as butter here is kem'ah, more precisely, curd or thickened, fermented milk, something closer to labneh or strained yogurt than butter in the modern sense. This combination, fermented milk curd, and raw honey appears across ancient medical traditions with notable consistency. Egyptian medical papyri from the Middle Kingdom period describe honey and milk preparations for intestinal distress. The Vedic Charaka Samhita recommends honey combined with dairy as a delivery medium for herbal compounds, noting that the combination enhanced absorption of other substances taken alongside it. Traditional Bedouin medicine used labneh strained fermented goat's milk with wild honey specifically for children's fever and gut illness. Raw, unfiltered honey, the cloudy, crystallized kind that has not been heat processed above 40 degrees Celsius, contains hydrogen peroxide generating enzymes. B-defensin. 1. Methylglyoxal in Manuka varieties, and a complex of oligosaccharide prebiotics that feed beneficial gut bacteria. A 2011 systematic review in the Asian Pacific Journal of Tropical Biomedicine documented honey's antimicrobial activity across over 60 bacterial species. The antibacterial properties of heated to filtered commercial honey are largely destroyed during processing. This is not a minor distinction. Fermented goat's milk curd contributes live cultures alongside casein peptides, particularly beta-casomorphin fragments, that have shown mild opioid-like calming effects at the level of the gut nervous system. The combination of honey's prebiotics, feeding the fermented curd's probiotic cultures, while the active antimicrobial compounds simultaneously reduce pathogen load, represents a form of gut intervention that modern, functional medicine is only now formalizing. Prepare this by straining whole milk goat's yogurt through cheesecloth for 8 hours in the refrigerator until it reaches labneh consistency thick. Spreadable. Slightly tangy. Stir 1 tablespoon of raw, unfiltered honey into it. Do not warm the honey. Add fresh thyme leaves. Eat this in the morning, before anything else. Isaiah was not prescribing a diet. He was describing a specific food given to a child as a marker of something being established. But the foods he named were precisely those his audience associated with restoration, clarity, and health. That was not accidental language. Number 3. Multigrain sprouted grain flatbread with olive oil and fresh herbs. Ezekiel 4:9 is one of the most nutritionally remarkable passages in Scripture. God gives Ezekiel specific instructions not for worship, not for conduct, but for bread. The exact ingredients are named wheat, barley, beans, lentils, millet, and spelt. Take these, mix them, make bread from them. This is what you will eat for the duration of your symbolic siege. Most commentary reads this as an instruction of deprivation, a hardship bread, the diet of siege conditions. But what the verse actually describes, when analyzed nutritionally, is something almost opposite. 6 grains and legumes combined produce a complementary amino acid profile that no single ingredient achieves alone. The lysine deficiency in wheat is compensated by the lentil and bean content. The methionine limitation in legumes is covered by the grain proteins. Together, this bread is a complete protein source. Now sprout those grains before grinding them. The sprouting process, exposing soaked grains to moisture and air for 24 to 72 hours until a small root tip emerges dramatically, alters their nutritional profile. Phytic acid content drops by 30 to 50%, making zinc, iron, calcium, and magnesium measurably more bioavailable. Enzyme inhibitors that slow digestion are deactivated. Vitamin C appears in the grain from near zero levels. Certain B vitamin concentrations increase by up to 40%. The glycemic index drops significantly because the starches partially convert to simple sugars during germination, then are consumed during the sprouting process itself, leaving a lower net carbohydrate food with a slower absorption profile. The ancient world did not have commercial yeasts. Most flatbreads were naturally leavened or unleavened. But grain stored in damp conditions, a normal reality in stone storehouses, would spontaneously begin to sprout. Cultures that learned to deliberately exploit this effect were extending both the digestibility and the nutritional density of their grain supply. Cook these flatbreads on a dry stone surface, or cast iron, never a non-stick surface, coated with polytetrafluoroethylene, which begins to off-gas at temperatures that flatbread cooking requires. Stone-ground whole grain flour retains the germ and bran fractions, where the vast majority of vitamins, minerals, and fatty acids concentrate. Commercial whole wheat flour is often stone-ground, but then stored for months. The oils in the germ fraction oxidize within days of grinding, if not refrigerated. If you can find a mill that grinds fresh and delivers refrigerated, the difference is measurable. Serve warm, immediately, with cold-pressed olive oil poured directly over the surface. The research on sprouted grain products consistently shows lower glycemic response, higher mineral bioavailability, and improved digestibility compared to conventional whole grain preparations. The ancient world stumbled onto this process through necessity. They kept it because their bodies told them it was working. Number 2. Barley bread with cold-pressed olive oil. Most people think of bread as filler. The ancient world thought of it as foundation. And the specific bread eaten daily across biblical-era cultures was doing something inside the body that modern food manufacturers have spent decades trying to replicate with supplements. When Jesus feeds 5,000 people in John 6, the loaves are barley, specifically noted by the text, a detail that would have been entirely unremarkable to the original audience. Barley was the grain of farmers, soldiers, and common people across the ancient world. Wheat was more expensive. Barley fed everyone else. And the relentless daily consumption of barley by ordinary people throughout the Near East for millennia turned out to be one of the most consequential dietary patterns in human history. Barley contains the highest concentration of beta-glucan fiber found in any whole grain. Beta-glucan is the compound responsible for one of the most robustly documented effects in nutritional science, LDL cholesterol reduction. The evidence for this is strong enough that the FDA authorized a qualified health claim for beta-glucan and heart disease risk reduction in 1997, one of the first such claims ever granted. Beta-glucan works by forming a viscous gel in the small intestine that binds bile acids, pulling them out of circulation and forcing the liver to convert additional cholesterol into new bile acids. Net effect: measurable reduction in circulating LDL over time, without any pharmaceutical intervention. Beyond cholesterol, beta-glucan feeds a specific subset of gut bacteria, particularly Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, that produce butyrate at higher rates than most fermentable fibers stimulate. Faecalibacterium prausnitzii is among the most intensively studied gut bacteria for its association with reduced colonic inflammation and lower rates of inflammatory bowel disease. Ancient peoples eating barley daily were consistently feeding one of the most anti-inflammatory organisms their gut contained. Now here is what changes everything about this bread. Work olive oil generously into the dough before baking, and pour more over the surface when it comes out of the oven. Barley beta-glucan is water-soluble. Its gel-forming properties function regardless of fat content. But the olive oil adds oleocanthal, the compound first identified in 2005 that inhibits COX-1 and COX-2 inflammatory enzymes via the same mechanism as ibuprofen. Daily consumption of high-quality extra virgin olive oil in the amounts that ancient bread preparation typically involved represents a consistent, low-grade anti-inflammatory intervention sustained across an entire lifetime. This was the bread of prophets and fishermen. Dense, dark, drenched in oil. Not a delicacy. An everyday food. Eaten without thinking. Doing something remarkable to the cardiovascular and metabolic systems of everyone who ate it faithfully, day after day. For decades, they didn't call it an intervention. They just called it bread. Number 1. The 7 Sacred Foods Feast Bowl. And now the one that changes how you read everything else. Deuteronomy 8:8. God is speaking to Moses about the land Israel is entering. And rather than describing it in general terms, rich soil, adequate rainfall, plentiful game, he becomes precise. 7 specific foods, listed by name, as the defining characteristics of this land, a land of wheat and barley, and vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey. Scholars have read this as agricultural poetry for 3,000 years. A description of fertility, evidence that the land could sustain life. That reading is correct. But nutritional scientists analyzing these 7 foods together as a system have found something that the agricultural reading doesn't account for. Wheat and barley together supply complementary proteins. B. Vitamin complexes, including thiamine, niacin, and folate. Slow-burning, complex carbohydrates. And the beta-glucan fiber we have already discussed, providing sustained cognitive and physical energy without the blood sugar disruption that refined grain causes. They are the metabolic foundation of the bowl. Grapes contribute resveratrol, quercetin, and OPC, proanthocyanidins, that activate cellular repair pathways, support cardiovascular function, and cross the blood-brain barrier to reduce neuroinflammation. They also deliver potassium at levels that support blood pressure regulation. Figs supply calcium, magnesium, and potassium in concentrations that the grains and vine fruits do not provide in sufficient quantities. They fill mineral gaps in the nutritional matrix as though the list were compiled by someone aware those gaps existed. Pomegranates deliver punicoagens, converted by gut bacteria into urolithins compounds, now being studied in clinical trials for their capacity to stimulate mitophagy and improve mitochondrial function in aging tissue. The antioxidant concentration of pomegranate juice outranks red wine, green tea, and blueberries in published comparisons. Olives, and this is the detail most people miss, do not merely contribute their own nutrition, eaten whole rather than pressed. They deliver O-european alongside oleocanthal and hydroxytyrosol, plus monounsaturated fats that dramatically increase the bioavailability of fat-soluble nutrients in every other element of this bowl. The olives are not just participants. They are delivery infrastructure for the entire system. Dates provide natural, rapid energy alongside condensed tannins with antimicrobial activity, potassium for blood pressure regulation, and fruit acids that enhance mineral absorption from everything surrounding them. Honey raw, unfiltered, never heated above body temperature, contributes oligosaccharide prebiotics that feed the gut bacteria responsible for metabolizing every polyphenol in this bowl into its most bioavailable form. The honey is not sweetness. It is a processing upgrade for everything else. Here is what the researchers found. When they looked at these 7 foods as a system, each one provides what the others lack. The fat-soluble vitamins from the olive oil and fruit skins are delivered alongside water-soluble vitamins from the grains and fresh produce. The protein gaps in the grains are addressed by the amino acid profiles of the leguminous foods used to supplement the bowl. The anti-inflammatory compounds from multiple sources, oleocanthal from olives, resveratrol from grapes, punicoagens from pomegranate, quercetin from figs appear to act on different pathways simultaneously, producing aggregate effects greater than any single ingredient could generate alone. The polyphenol diversity in this bowl rivals what modern researchers are now describing as the optimal pattern for supporting gut microbiome richness. Build this bowl. Whole grain, barley, and ancient wheat as the base. Fresh grapes. Sliced figs. Pomegranate arils scattered throughout. A handful of whole brined olives. Medjool dates on the side. Honey drizzled last. Raw and unfiltered. Everything finished with cold-pressed extra virgin olive oil. Poured generously. Eat it. And understand something that the people standing at the edge of the promised land understood completely, without a single clinical trial to confirm it. This was not a description of a fertile landscape. It was a prescription for a life well lived. And 3,000 years later, cancer researchers, cardiologists, gut health scientists, and mitochondrial biologists keep arriving at the same set of coordinates where those 7 foods are already standing. There is one thing that runs through every item on this list, and it is worth saying directly before we close. Every one of these foods depends on quality to deliver what ancient people experienced from them. Cold-pressed olive oil is not the same product as refined olive oil, regardless of what the label says. Raw honey is not the same as filtered, heated commercial honey. Stone-ground whole-grain flour bears no nutritional resemblance to the white flour that has stripped away the germ, the bran, and the fatty acid fraction, where most of the biological activity lives. Fermented goat's milk curd that has been alive for 24 hours contains billions of viable organisms. The same product that has been pasteurized after fermentation and stored for 3 weeks contains almost none. The active compounds in these foods, the oleocanthal, the allicin, the punicle agents, the beta-glucan, the urolithin precursors are not robust. They are fragile. They are destroyed by heat, processing, refinement, and storage in ways that produce something that looks like the original food and functions almost nothing like it. The ancient world did not have this problem. They ate everything fresh, whole, and minimally processed by necessity. We have to choose it. This is the detail that most wellness content glosses over, because it complicates the story. It is easier to say, eat pomegranate, than to explain that commercially processed pomegranate juice retains a fraction of the punicle-agin content found in fresh arils eaten from the fruit. It is easier to say eat garlic than to explain that garlic powder, garlic salt, and pre-minced garlic in jars deliver minimal allicin activity compared to freshly crushed garlic rested for 10 minutes. Quality is not a luxury consideration. For these foods, in these combinations, it is the entire mechanism. The people of the ancient world were not eating better because they had access to superior knowledge. They were eating better because they had no alternative to the real thing. We have every alternative. The question that will outlast this video is whether we choose, knowing what we now know, to return to what actually works. If this kind of ancient wisdom resonates with you, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone you love who still believes that good nutrition has to be complicated or expensive. And drop in the comments, which of these 13 meals are you making first? I read every one of them. This video is for educational and informational purposes only. The content presented here is not intended as medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional before making changes to your diet, especially if you are managing a health condition or taking medications.